If you do have questions online or want to introduce yourselves, press *6 to unmute yourself. And otherwise, we'll just continue with the talk. Dr.
Okay.
Seth Landefeld is here for those of you online who have not had the opportunity to meet him. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you.
So what I was going to speak about was 10 rules to make, wanted to speak about most of you, I'm thinking, are oriented towards developing as investigators, and was going to speak about things that guidelines or tips that we can chat about and that I hope might be helpful to you. And I've written these down here. And take questions along the way or afterwards, and also talk about promotion and tenure afterwards as well. The first one, these are like really simple, and it's unbelievable how rarely people actually do these things. But first is to be clear about your goal, and that many of you who has a goal that they're pretty clear about, they'd like to share with us.
A research goal, or
you choose your goal.
My immediate goal is to get my R01 funded.
Mm-hmm.
I am studying genetic nuances based on ancestry for type 2 diabetes risk.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And very interested in how we group populations in epidemiologic research,
mm-hmm.
when really many times we should be looking at the individual groups that comprise larger groups.
Mm-hmm.
So groups of African ancestry, Native American ancestry, like Hispanic Latinos, for example, that have varied background groups that we tend to just categorize them into Hispanic Latino box,
mm-hmm.
right, in research. And that has implications for genetic risk. And so as a genetic epidemiologist, my goal is to better understand how that genetic risk is attributable to ancestral proportions.
To ancestral?
Proportion, so ancestry proportion.
Okay. So I heard two goals there. One was to put food on the table. Getting an R01 is all about putting food on the table. And the other was more interesting, which is to understand genetic predictors of risk, in particular related to let's say genetic predictors of risk.
Yes.
It's all about biologic background, isn't it? Mm-hmm. That's what genes are all about.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what I didn't hear Bertha say is that her goal is not to decide whether or not she wants to do research. When I first did a research fellowship, that was really my goal. Do I like this stuff or don't I? And when you're starting off as a junior faculty member, you say, you already have a K.
I do.
I take it. So that you've already gotten to a point of saying, well, your goal is no longer to find out, kind of make the initial survival steps, but really you focused on really a research question that you would like to make some discoveries in. So I think the big thing to be clear about is, if you're doing research, what is your goal in research? What is the big thing that you want to do? And I would encourage each of you to think about, where's the Nobel Prize in what you're doing? What is the big area, the big question that you really want to address? Any of you laboratory-based investigators? Carolyn. Well, you're the Nobel Prizes don't go to people who don't do laboratory-based work anymore. And in general, you can forget it anyway because they don't go to MDs anymore. But still, I think, what is the big question that you would really like to address? And I'm still not really sure what your question is, Bertha, but it's something about predicting risk of outcomes in diabetes in particular.
Yes.
Using genetic predictors. And that could lead to all sorts of interesting things. And what sorts of discoveries there do you think would be really, would affect either our understanding of biology or how we can prevent disease or treat disease?
So one of the things that I've recently been working on is understanding how varied the ancestry is in Hispanic Latinos with respect to risk for type 2 diabetes. And we recently published a paper that suggests that if you are of Mexican descent, as opposed to, say, for example, Puerto Rican nativity or Cuban or South or Central American, that if you have variants within a specific gene, your risk for type 2 diabetes increases by about 30%. Mm-hmm. If you belong to any of the other Hispanic background groups, there seems to be a protective effect if you have those variants. And so what that means is that there may be some therapeutic implications for having variants of this gene, and that we could target drugs to, much like PCSK9, for example, to create inhibitors for the variants within this gene and help treat type 2 diabetes, not only in Mexican Americans, but figure out how it works mechanistically in the body to be beneficial for all populations.
Okay. So that by understanding this, you might be able to better prevent diabetes developing in high-risk people or treat it in folks who actually have it. Yes. Those would be big things. So being clear about what your goal is. Are any of you folks in the process of writing your K award? So what's the #1 sentence in that first paragraph of the?
My goal is to develop into an independent investigator.
You got it. Okay. So that it's a great example of at that stage. You're saying that you want to acquire the training, the skills, the attitudes, the experiences that will allow you to go on and do what Bertha is saying. To address a series of questions as an R01. As a independent investigator. Okay. It's really important to be clear about your goal because that is your North Star. And it's really hard, particularly in the urban environments in which we live. You never see the North Star. You can lose sight of things. And all sorts of people will come along and try and push you off the path. To finding your North Star. So keeping that in mind as to what your goal is really important. You can revisit it every 3 to 5 years. Bertha may get 22 R01s in the next 10 years and then decide, I don't like this game anymore, that I want to, plot my course to a different direction. But you can change it, but keeping your eye on that North Star. And, for those of us doing research, it's really about, trying to answer a question where you can better understand, what's happening with people with a disease, either to better understand the biology or to better understand, mechanism or prognosis or management. The second thing, and this is universally applicable advice, is be curious. And you will never be an independent investigator if you're not curious. Probably never be a good teacher, never be a good doctor either, if you're not curious. And I think there are folks who really like doing stuff, you know, with the pipetting stuff in the lab, or, you know, working with computers, or, you know, doing different things, who may not be curious. And they may be really good technically at stuff, but they're not going to, you know, be an independent investigator. They're probably not going to be a great teacher. And the point about being curious is that probably the most interesting things that you discover are going to be things that you stumble on, and you know, that are going to arise in unexpected ways at unexpected times. And if you're, you know, if you're open to that sort of stuff, then you're going to make those interesting, interesting sorts of, you know, sorts of discoveries. An example of that from my work, I love doing prediction. And you know, quantitative approaches using clinical information to make predictions about what's going to happen to people. And one of the early studies I did was, I was really interested in this really quaint, now outmoded, the hospital wants to outlaw way that we have of making diagnostic tests about quality of the autopsy. You know, it is the best gold standard for when we make big mistakes. And I was really interested. I think most of us as doctors think that we can predict, you know, which patients the autopsy is going to be valuable in, or at least those that in whom it's not going to be valuable. And we've done a study of several hundred people, and you know, identified the 20% of people who had big surprises at autopsy. And you know, I was pretty sure that we were going to be able to predict it. This was before deep learning, you know, so maybe if you apply deep learning to the data, it would do, you know, better than we did with the usual, you know, bivariate, multivariate techniques. But it turned out we could risk stratify people pretty well in our training set, but then in our testing set, we didn't predict any better than chance. You know, that was really interesting. And first I was depressed, actually. So, oh my God, you know, I'm supposed to be able to predict this. And then in conversations with folks, my you know, mentor was thinking about this, and I was watching him, and he said, you know, this is, I didn't come to this discovery, he did. This is really interesting. You know, you know, what are the implications of not being able to predict the 20% of people who have big surprises on autopsy? Any thoughts that you guys would have?
Maybe everybody should do it.
Yeah. If you're really interested in learning this stuff, you should move to Malmö, Sweden, and you know, get those autopsies. You know, that's not the, God, I will start the, you guys, I mean, I know Adam knows what ODE ratios are. Most of you guys see the garbage that we put out on ODE ratios of mortality. Do you know what they are?
No.
Oh man. This is ODEM, the observed to expected mortality ratios.
Oh, sure.
You know, so it turns out that in the Department of Medicine, approximately 900 people die at UAB hospital every year. And you know, the question is, well, should they or shouldn't they? You know, I can tell you based on autopsy studies, probably about 10, you know, 5 to 10% of them probably shouldn't. You know, we do all this risk stratification stuff and come up with an observed expected mortality ratio. But if you really want to, yeah, so the implication would be, you know, should we be using autopsy much further if we really wanted to understand what we're missing? So being curious. The other the studies that were most interesting to me were the studies that I did on, you know, driven by curiosity on sweat equity. You know, without the more money that I had to do a study, the less interesting it became, by and large. Now, you know, I'm in a different position now, so I can't tell you that. You know, we want you guys to get lots of money, and, you know, bring that money into UAB.
So Part of the challenge that I've experienced with that specifically is that the things that I find most interesting aren't necessarily the things that get funded or get funded well, right? So maybe I get $10,000 to do something small, and the power is small or low, and sample size is small, and it may or may not lead to anything. And the questions that are sort of just inching, in my opinion, science forward are the ones that seem or appear to be most fundable. So what is your advice for being able to pursue that curiosity in a way that puts food on the table, so to speak, at an early stage?
Work hard. Don't eat much. So, I mean, many of you have done that. Many of you have been on T32s. I mean, that's the ultimate, be curious and don't eat much approach. A K is sort of like that as well. Don't become an interventional cardiologist. You'll get addicted to money. Well, so I think, I mean, it's a little facetious. My God, you guys don't even have whiteboards? So work hard. So I'll jump at number 5 is work hard.
I can get you a whiteboard.
No, I can show you. You guys are the This is a productivity curve. There are 168 hours in a week, and this is your output. Say it's American Journal of Epi papers or grants or great discoveries, whatever it is. The point is, the more hours you work, the more output, until you crash and burn. And my guess is the crash and burn number is probably somewhere between 80 and 120 hours per week. That if you are working 40 hours a week, you're not going to have a lot of time to satisfy curiosity. So that's the work hard part of things. And then I'll use this to talk about work smart too. The other, be in a place, this covers all the other things, that's in a great microenvironment that's well resourced. What is it? Is it chikungunya virus? Is that? Sorry?
Chikungunya.
Chikungunya? Okay. So I heard a talk last weekend in which this extraordinary scientist at WashU was talking about chikungunya virus and alpha viruses. And it turns out that nobody knows how they get into cells. And they've got to get into cells to do damage. And I don't think he had R1s to do this work. He would, WashU's got a lot of money. They got a lot more money than we do, but I'm sure this guy's a great scientist. I'm sure he's got more money than most people at WashU to do, to tell his postdocs or other folks, look into this. Well, they found a protein on the surface of cells that got infected. I think they did this genetic modification of cells to find out which ones would get infected. Nobody had any idea what this protein did. They still don't have any idea, other than allow chikungunya virus to get into your cell. So they figured, gee, I mean, this protein must be important. And then the thing that really struck me is curiosity. He sent one of his postdocs. He said, go see if you can find this protein on different animals. So I guess they had, some cells of a whole bunch of different animals, and the protein was on elephants, and the protein was on lions, and it was on tigers, but it was not on cows. Cows do not have this protein. And then cows don't get chikungunya virus. And then the guy went to the St. Louis Zoo, where they have a whole bunch of different, what do you call cows? The ruminants, or a whole bunch of different ruminants, or whatever, subspecies they are, or species they are. And they found that all of these different, cow-like creatures, from Africa, don't have the virus, don't have the protein either, until they got pretty far out on the phylogenetic tree, and they started finding it again. So I didn't mean. To me, this is really cool. It's just an incredible story. And then they tie it together, saying that if you're a herd of cattle on the sub-Saharan plain, then if one of them gets chikungunya virus, the herd goes. So that they had to get rid of sometime, and they could actually work back and think that sometime between 10 and 15 million years ago, that these animals had lost the protein. So I tell that story as well. It's a crazy story because it's totally sparked by curiosity. Is it going to lead to anything that will allow us to treat or prevent chikungunya virus? I don't know. But they were driven by the curiosity in the context of they clearly had the resources to do that. Now, some of those resources was the sweat equity of the person who was doing the work, but they have the laboratory to do it in as well. I think the first, an early sort of high impact paper that I had was as co-author with my wife. She was the first author, and it was about this was sparked by curiosity. She was a dermatology resident, and she got a $100 check from a pharmaceutical rep. And she asked, "Well, why are you giving me this check?" And the rep said, "Well, because we care about you." She said, "Well, what's going on here?" So she went and to the guy who headed the bioethics center at Case and worked with him, and found wrote a piece in JAMA about what's going on with doctors' relationships with drug companies, and that it violates our ethical standards that we espouse to as physicians. But it also, she got into there's this anthropology. Anybody know the gift relationship?
Just the idea that if they give you a gift, human nature, we kind of reciprocate.
Yeah, reciprocation. That's one of the three things that you do with a gift relationship. Anybody get a gift from your mother last Christmas? What did you do with it? Or what did you do?
I don't remember what I got.
Who remembers what they got?
I'm sure I used it and wore it and in front of her.
Okay. So you demonstrated grateful conduct. You probably said thank you. You demonstrated gratitude. And perhaps you gave her a gift as well. You reciprocated. So the anthropologists have defined this pretty well. Initially looking at, this guy Mouse did it, I think, initially looking in primitive society somewhere or other. And then in Western culture, it first got looked at and looking at people donating blood. But this gift relationship thing is really, really strong. So I gave grand rounds once and said, this is a questionable behavior we have, accepting these $100 checks. We ought to think about this. And somebody said, "Where's the evidence?" I said, "Well, that's a good question." And there was no evidence. So we conducted the first controlled trial of the relationship between what physicians accepted from companies and whether or not they exhibited a particular behavior, which at that time was asking that a drug be put on a formulary. This was for $0 other than using the Xeroxer at that time in our in the hospital. And it was a really cool design. it was a, nested case control study with, and you could, with different sorts of controls, and it led to incredibly, the odds ratios were 20. The only things that gives you odds ratio, smoking and lung cancer, you get odds ratios of 20. It's hard to get around causal effect without, with odds ratios that high. But so that's another, that you could say it was really stupid of me to do, because it didn't lead to an R1. And it may have slowed my trajectory of getting R1s, but it's still, it was fun. I was curious, and it led to high impact publication. So being curious, I think, is really good. I will commend to you guys a paper by Faith Fitzgerald in the Annals, probably about 20 years ago. I don't think I ever. I give it to whenever I attend to my teams. Faith Fitzgerald, it's called Curiosity. And she tells the story, do you know who discovered Hep B? They got the Nobel Prize for Hep B. A conversation she had with him, where this guy, he's talking about, Beethoven and Charcot's and Hep B, and his mind was just like, was a wildly curious guy. And then she goes on to tell a clinical story of why curiosity is so incredibly important, both to understand patients and also for teaching. But be curious. It's good. It will make your life a lot more fun. Get the best training in the world. This is really hard for doctors to believe. I think PhDs believe it more. That it's really hard to convince physicians that they really, that if they want to do science, it's like a competitive game. And it's really competitive, and the better training that you get, the more likely you are to really be able to satisfy that curiosity and and do well in the long run. I'd be curious. Love to hear some of the training experience that some of you have had in terms of getting your training. How you went about deciding how long you put into it. Carolyn?
Well, I guess starting in fellowship,
Right.
I worked with my division chief
Mm-hmm.
at the University of Washington. And he was considered kind of a national, international expert in podocyte biology, had been kind of the leader in the field in understanding cell cycle regulatory proteins in the podocyte's response to injury and progressive disease. So I thought that was an important choice if you're talking about the best training in the world. I would consider him kind of the expert in cell cycle regulatory proteins in podocyte biology. And while my colleagues were sort of going into clinical practice, making more money, I chose to do this four-year fellowship. So staying longer in the lab than most people would have as a clinician scientist kind of prepared me for what I would do later. And then transferred here. I was recruited here in 2011 by Dr. Agarwal and stayed, and again, joined another lab just because I wanted a different experience in someone that was, again, nationally and internationally known for his area. Like he had discovered proteins that no one else had discovered in kind of understanding podocyte biology, Sumant Chuk. So he was, writing Nature Medicine papers, and so then I kind of latched onto him in a different course, but learned another subset of skills that I think were necessary to lay the foundation for becoming an independent investigator and starting my own lab. So those are two experts that I thought that gave me the training background that I've utilized.
That was a great example.
Yeah.
How did you choose podocyte biology?
It was Stuart Shankland. I mean, just the division chief. That's what he was studying. Because I really did not know what to choose. I think that's
I don't think basic scientists understand, like, the people that you just happen to meet guide you along the course. Like, you would have never thought that you would end up in that field. I wouldn't have as a resident. I wouldn't have thought that I was going to be a photosynthetic biologist, but because I met him at that particular moment in time, that guided me to that point. So luck is a big part of it.
I think it's a great illustration of, that you may, decide you want to get the best training you can at this particular technique or this particular research question, and, I've got to go to Brussels to do it, or, you can look around you and find, well, here I've got somebody who's, the best in the world in this area, learn from him. So I think that's a really, really great example. And I think, many of us on the physician side anyway, don't start with that you're interested in a particular kind of work, a particular set of questions, but you don't start with a very narrow, research question right off. You're really looking for that great training. And also, I think and having the patience to engage in that for, 4 years, I think is also really a great illustration. We'll interview really capable people who spent a year or two in the lab and they want to become a great biologist or something or other. And, folks who are great biologists will say, well, you don't want to go into the clinic. It's going to take another couple of years to really, really become great at that. So getting the best training in the world. I think your experience as well, Carolyn, also illustrates, finding a great microenvironment and settling in. And, this is the, person-environment fit is really, really important. What's a great microenvironment for Grant may not be a great microenvironment for me, may not be a great microenvironment for Carolyn, but finding something where the fit feels really good to you. Some of that is about the Wash U story, some of the resources around that you're going to have, whatever the bells and whistles are that you need, but also the people, the commitment to the kinds of questions that you're asking is really important. And then, settling into that to give yourself the time and the luxury to really to let things run. All of you have thought about microenvironments over the last couple of years. How have some of you? What are things that you've seen in environments that were good, that look good to you, environments that didn't look so good to you?
Can you clarify what you mean by microenvironment?
Okay, the leukemic stem cell sits in a mesenchymal stroma. That's what I mean. What is the scaffolding in the bone marrow? So I think a microenvironment is probably never less than 3, rarely less than 5 people, and not more than probably 20 or so. The people on your, certainly in your laboratory, on your hallway. For me, when I was a fellow, it was, the 4 fellows my year, the 2 or 3 fellows a year ahead of me, the epidemiologist, the lead physician investigator, and 2 or 3 other junior faculty. And those are the people that I rubbed shoulders with. Would be.
So not necessarily your mentoring team, but maybe just your support team, or people that you get good vibes from?
Well, if your mentor's not in that microenvironment, then it's not a good microenvironment.
I would just say, I think I like how you say microenvironment. It's not like, I think we're all shaped not just by like UAB at large, but it really is that like niche where you sit. And I guess having joined roughly 3 years ago and looked most of the entire Southeast for positions, it was the microenvironment here that brought me. And I guess mine's more formalized, but it's a specific institute that does have my mentor in it. but also has a support staff for database design, doing patient survey, and they may not do exactly my type of research, but it totally facilitates everything that I do. So coming here and being able to do my type of research is rather easy rather than completely building a new infrastructure, and also rubbing shoulders with people who have similar ideas and concepts and similar curiosity. I think that makes a big difference. I think sometimes the microenvironment is harder to define depending on where you kind of sit or housed and how physical it is. But I do think that makes a tremendous difference.
Yes, I mean, the fact that UAB is a great university, that there are all these resources here is completely almost immaterial to your microenvironment. I mean, knowing Grant's microenvironment, the other thing I would say that's really important is that everyone is on the same path, going the same direction. That laser is highly, what is it, collimated or something? I mean, yeah, the light waves are all going the same direction. You don't have, 3 people running off this way, 5 people running off that way, but it feels good. Examples, if, I don't know if, Carolyn and Grant, any of you guys work with Paul Muntner?
Not close.
Not you, these guys. So, Paul Muntner is like, I think, one of the best epidemiologists in the country. He's in the School of Public Health, he's just phenomenal. But completely irrelevant, to what Grant's doing, and, until you decide, unless you were to develop a, collaboration. If you're cardiovascular disease or hypertension, might be more, so there might be, the ultimate illustration of this is, Longwood Avenue, Harvard Medical School, a zillion, great people, but if the 10 people that you're working with aren't, the folks that you really enjoy and that you get a lot out of, then it's not gonna get you very far.
One of the suggestions, I was meeting with early stage investigators earlier this week, and the question came up. She said she feels really isolated where she sits every day. And so she said, how do I find people like me? So finding a microenvironment is how I'm relating this. How can she help find her microenvironment? One of the suggestions was to write in R25 the grant to host a conference. Is that the conference one? R24?
R13.
Okay, and then to pull those people together, to pull everyone who's doing the same research together in that sense, so that you find your microenvironment in different ways. Any thoughts about that? About finding it if you haven't found it?
Move.
Good.
I think if you're a junior person, so when my first faculty job was at Case, and this was at a time when there were probably like 5 associate professor clinical epidemiologists in the country, and one of them was there. And so I went there, I was from Cleveland originally, I knew people, and but I went there in part because, when David Grant's on? David Ransohoff is why we don't do cholecystectomies on asymptomatic gallstones, and colorectal screening guy at UNC. A great clinical epidemiologist, but so he was there. That was a little bit of a microenvironment. The year after I went, he went to UNC. There was, it wasn't, like being in my richer microenvironment at, the Brigham, and it was, what made it was, so I ended up creating my own. There weren't lots of microenvironments at that time to move to, but I think what really made it good was beginning the first 2 research fellows that I had, in my, the 3 of us, it violated every rule that you guys are told, second year assistant professor and developing other people, and, but it was building your culture, building your environment right there. So if you can't do that quickly, there's, 1 equals 0, that having 1 of anything is not a long-term survival strategy. Now, the other part of move is that on a camp, and part of the advantage of a campus like this is that almost anything you're in, there are going to be 5 other people who are interested in similar sorts of things somewhere. You know, how could you shoehorn yourself into their space would be something I would wonder about. And it is, we do not pay enough formal attention to co-locating. I mean, it's really important, I think. And I worry about people whose mentor is not, you know, across the hall or down the hall. You know, that if you're not gonna do much with people that you don't run into at the water cooler or the whiteboard. I don't in general. Work hard. So I go back to this curve. Now I'll talk about work hard and work smart together. So the y-axis is your output, whatever is important to you. And I don't know, the usual 40-hour week, it doesn't get you to the 10,000 hours that you need to do to achieve mastery very quickly. So the longer that you work up to a point, the more that you're going to produce. And I don't think there are many folks who are maintaining an independent research program who aren't, putting in a good bit more than 40 hours a week. And so that's important. The working smart part of this is, it's really about, where does the curve take off and what is the slope of the curve? And if you're doing research, the flat part of the curve is being in clinic. Other than being there enough to generate good ideas and to be good for your heart and mind. It's sitting on committees. It's going to conferences. It's traveling. Traveling is a complete and total waste of time if you're trying to get work done, until you're rich and famous. That if you're invited to give talks when you're your guy's stage, there's only almost, unless it's in Stockholm or maybe, the White House, there's one answer, and that's no. It's maybe a little bit more too extreme, but all of those things keep your productivity down there. So the faster, if your curve can take off here, the other way you can have a flatter curve here and still be really productive is work 80 hours or 90 hours or 100 hours a week. But most of us don't want to do that. And then the other thing is, what can you do to, shift the slope of your curve up? I think the WashU story I told you about chikungunya virus is, where the postdoc was who did that. They were in an environment where they could, they had the resources to be able to do things probably much faster. Having the microenvironment, I know, for grants work, having to have to go get a statistical consult flattens the slope of your curve. To have a statistician across the hall or somebody who knows more about methods than you do, readily available, that will, improve the slope of your curve. I know very little about, laboratory work, there are all sorts of sequencers, all sorts of, zillion-dollar machines that, allow people to get done in, an hour what it used to take a year to do. Or any of you guys do deep learning stuff? Machine learning? I've been asking, it's all possible because of, that you can do on a computer this big where it used to take you to do, on a computer as big as this building sort of thing. I think those sorts of tools are going to accelerate stuff a lot. If anybody in the Department of Medicine wanted to get proficient at deep learning, we would invest in it. If you guys read any, some of the last month or two in JAMA, there were articles predicting opioid overdose, chest X-ray reading, and something else where the opioid overdose one compared to the usual multivariate techniques that we grow up with that give you the usual ROC curves of 0.75 to 0.8, for these deep learning techniques with training, testing, and 3 data sets, and even in the third data set, 150,000 people, they're still achieving C statistics of 0.95. You say there's something in there that I need to learn about, so that might shift your curve to the left. But thinking, what is it about the resources around you, the environment around you that can shift the curve to the left? Right. Anybody here enjoy writing? Wow. You've got huge advantages. I can get into it. I read an interview once with a novelist, John Marth, who was describing, they were asking, how do you write? And he said he sat down at the typewriter, slashed his wrist and just started bleeding. And I think that it's always painful. And it's really, I'm very, very good at procrastinating and finding 92 other things to do before actually sitting down to write. But you gotta write. And there are folks who really, not only, I think that you have to like writing to some degree. You have to like, being able, to communicate clearly in words, which is a lot of work. But if you, have great thoughts, make great discoveries, but don't write about it, you're not going to have the impact that you want. You're not going to be able to put food on the table. That it's a short-lived thing. Any contrary points to that? So, Socrates said that writing is a crutch for the mind. That really you shouldn't write. You should just be thinking. But that doesn't count for for our stuff. You do want to publish some high impact things. We can all get better at writing. It is the stuff that we write is it's not great literature by and large. It's fairly formulaic. You can tell what the first sentence was of the day. That there are things that that there will be 3 specific games, not 1, not 5, sort of thing. Learning what what is expected and then how to present it really clearly makes a huge difference. These days, NIH is mostly funding stuff. If you're in something where they're funding north of the 15th percentile, you're lucky. So the difference between 17th percentile and 14th percentile could be the difference in getting funding. And to some degree, the biggest determinant of that is it is a crapshoot. That you can send the same grant to 2 different study sections, and one of them will get nerfed, and the other will get 10th percentile or something. But I do believe clear writing and nice presentation are that's like it's all you can do with the things that are under your control. Those are things that are really under your control. So having other people read it, getting it critiqued, putting your blood, sweat, and tears into making what you write really clear, I think it does help communicate your ideas, but it also helps you, put the food on the table. Talk with your family, be clear, and act accordingly. So, what are the expectations? I don't know if any of you guys have run into issues where you and your spouse like didn't talk about expectations about important things. I heard a story last week about a couple that was, you know, somewhere in the middle of the country in training. They'd been together for, you know, 3 or 4 years, and like, but they never talked about that. One of them wanted to go to LA for fellowship, the other wanted to go to Boston, and like, this was not a good situation to be in. So it's, you know, talking about expectations with regard to, you know, what is the work life going to look like? And I think the other important expectations are, you know, what are the income expectations? You know, that if, you know, one half of the family thinks that the income is going to be, you know, $400,000 a year, and the other half of the family thinks that, you know, the income is going to be $100,000 a year. You know, that's, you know, every income over $75,000 or so has exactly the same relationship to quality of life. But, you know, those are expectations that could, you know, could get you into trouble. The examples of that, any of you guys have examples of this? Well, I used to write a lot of grants, and like, you know, they didn't get funded the first time around, so you'd have to rewrite them. And I remember, I don't even remember what grant this was, but I do remember taking it on vacation, you know, and it was due, they never do it a good time. And, you know, like every morning, you know, from 8 until, you know, 1 or so, I would be writing the grant. My wife would take, you know, the kids off to the beach. And, you know, it worked, but we hadn't talked about it ahead of time. I hadn't said, you know, this is, how can we, you know, negotiate on this? I really need to get this done. And, you know, I'm definitely a person who, you know, something unpleasant to talk about or look at, I'll stick my head in the sand. You know, you know, that's, I've learned more, you know, but having those conversations up front is definitely a good thing. And like, you know, this little issue here, the 40 hours or 80 hours, is like a good thing to have conversations about over time, you know, because life changes, and you know, that you know, what looks pretty reasonable when you don't have any kids, you know, like, you know, they look very different when you have a couple of kids. So having those conversations is important, and then acting accordingly. Obama's last Secretary of Defense was a guy named Ash Carter, who you know, said that the two, and he's got a book coming out on his 35 years in the Pentagon. I think it's called The Five-Sided Box or something. But the two things that guided him were, he said, clarity and conduct. You know, to be as clear as possible about, you know, what the expectations were, and then to make sure that his conduct always, you know, was as congruent as possible, you know, with those expectations. This is probably good in families. It's definitely good in medicine. You never see that violated, do you? Where's the, you know, somebody has expectations of, you know, like, what's the consultant to do? Are you to be writing all those orders, or to consult? Or, you know, is the, you know, consultation to be done, you know, before noon or sometime tomorrow? You know, they're, you know, being clear about what the expectations are. And, you know, what was that question you wanted me to answer anyway? And then acting accordingly is very, very important. So the last two are two things that I've only learned systematically relatively late in life. Learn from others and develop sponsors. And do this systematically. Whatever environment you're in, it is taking the time to, you know, identify 5 or 10 people that you'd like to learn from, and, you know, just learn their stories and learn their experiences and what was valuable to them, what issues they ran into, what they wish they'd done or knew when they were back at your stage or something, you can learn a lot. It's a little scary, well, geez, I don't know, part of this, I don't have time for that. I got 122 emails to answer, or I got 10 patients to see, or something like that. And also, who would really want to talk to me? But it's really interesting. Almost everybody is really happy to talk to you about themselves, and tell you, some about them, and you can sort of be like a mini anthropologist in that situation. And the braver that you can be in that, even with people who seem a little scary, the more you'll learn. One of my mentors, I met in Cleveland when I was there, was a guy named Sid Katz, who developed the index for ADL and done a lot of health services research, and just being able to get to know him and hear his experiences and how his career developed was just incredibly informative and helpful. Developing sponsors. I've been thinking about this because I have never done this systematically, and I will put out there that each of us is probably, some folks you'll see are really good at developing sponsors and managing up, and they don't always treat the people around them or below them that well, although maybe there are people who are good at both. Other folks are good at, sort of with their colleagues and, sort of, managing their program or managing down. And I'm pretty good at that, and that's where I focus my attention. But developing sponsors and thinking about people who can advocate for you is, at least for me and for a lot of us, I think it has to be very intentional. Again, identifying 5 or 10 folks who are in positions, could be your division chief, or you're in the School of Medicine, it could be somebody in the School of Public Health, or it could be somebody in your field at another institution. But you always, you're at a national meeting, or you'll have opportunities to write them ahead of time and say, gee, I'd like to get together with you and tell you something about my career, what I'm doing, and get your thoughts on things that I might do better, or learn from your experience. And those are folks. If they don't know you, if they haven't had FaceTime with you, they're not going to think of you. When opportunities come up, or you're not going to have the relationship. Maybe 2 years from now, you'd like to call them up and ask them something really important. But if you've already built that relationship, it gives you much more of an opportunity to do it. And so, this was never on my tick box of things to do, but I think it is now. As I go to things, I actually think, who would I like to, talk to and potentially develop as a sponsor over the next few months. So those are 10 thoughts that I wanted to share with you guys. I'm happy to talk about, promotion and tenure issues as well, either in the UAB environment or elsewhere, or to take any questions that you guys have.
Thank you very much.